In this Europa Universalis 5 material, how to build your country's economy simply and efficiently so that you earn a lot without major problems. That is, what to build where, which values to choose, and what you can automate so you do not have to deal with it. Taking the latest changes into account, these steps will be optimal for all countries except republics or nations that have many cities and towns and few villages. That is to say, this strategy would also work here, but there is a different, much better one. And I will prepare it soon. Greetings imperialists, Lucas here. I would divide building the economy in EU5 into 2 stages. The first stage lasts from the start of the game until the onset of the Reformation era, that is almost 200 years. Although in reality the second stage begins at the moment when you research most of the tier 2 technologies related to production buildings which increase their efficiency. And it lasts until the end of the game. Between these stages there is a transition period. Taxes. The entire strategy relies heavily on them, so it is worth understanding how they work. By default, you can tax each social estate at a rate of 30%. However, the greater its power, the less you can tax it. Moreover, you can also influence this through privileges as well as national laws. Although some social estates are sometimes impossible to tax, for example, the clergy among Catholics. Each production building that you construct increases the tax base of a given location. You can see the sum of this base from all buildings here. How much you earn from a given location is shown below in green, and exactly how it works is detailed in this tooltip. However, your tax base is highly dependent on a statistic called control. In percentage terms, it reduces your tax base. It also has a very negative impact on many other factors. So, to summarize, the amount shown when you build this building will not increase your income by that value 1-to-1. Values in your country. These 3 that you see now are the most important for you when it comes to building the economy. At this stage of the game, decentralization increases estate satisfaction and the passive growth of that satisfaction, which will allow you to increase tax burdens while keeping estate satisfaction at 50%. Below this value, estates begin the path toward rebellion. On the other hand, faster growth of estate satisfaction will be useful in parliamentary actions. More on that in a moment. Serfdom simply increases the maximum taxation of peasants, which allows you to extract truly significant sums from the peasant estate. This estate is practically unmatched in this regard during the first 200 years. Serfdom also increases the extraction of basic resources, which synergizes perfectly with the same bonus from the traditional economy. And you want cheap raw materials, because this is the only thing that enables you to engage in any trade at all. And the cheaper your input resources are, the more you will earn on the output in your production buildings. Traditional economy also slightly affects population growth, mainly because it will be easier for you to obtain the bonus for cheap food and it increases the bonus for land availability. If, however, your country already has these values strongly pushed in the right direction, then you do not need to do anything, only increase them through events. Or sometimes these values are available here in agendas in Parliament. England, however, has a problem with these. When you hover over each of these values, you can clearly see what you need to do to increase its monthly growth and the maximum strength of that value. Most often, these are privileges that you grant here in the Estates tab or laws that your country has. If anything, do not change laws at this moment. This is not the time for that. The appropriate moment for this is always a parliamentary session, government reforms and privileges. For most monarchies, the ideal first 2 reforms are this and this, because they increase the values you care about. In other forms of government, there is usually an option available that increases serfdom, so the remaining reforms are flexible as long as they do not negatively affect these values. Privileges. Try to add everything that increases serfdom and the traditional economy. Start with the estates that have the smallest percentage here and finish with those that have the largest percentage here. This is because granting a privilege affects the satisfaction of all estates each time, and the effect is stronger the higher this percentage is, and each privilege increases it. Additionally, for the burghers, make sure you have the privilege that increases prosperity, the passive growth of development. Prosperity and development provide many benefits, but the main point here is population growth. And more importantly, building roads. This will allow you to save tons of money and will slowly increase your control. And treasury rights, because they increase tax efficiency. And tax efficiency itself increases your tax income by that value. And in order not to have it negative, it is very important to have the crown above 25%. The crown also affects the percentage you receive from trade that takes place within your country. In general, you increase the crown statistic by practicing nepotism. Everywhere in important positions, you want to have members of your dynasty. That is, characters who have this crown icon next to them. First of all, in advisor positions, make one of them the Prime Minister, which will strengthen the effect. Fleet Admiral, Army General. They are easy to find when you set the search filter to Crown. Each of these characters provides a certain scalable bonus, and if you do not have such characters, then you will simply have to expand your dynasty. The Cabinet and Advisors. The first action I would use is accelerating value change. Personally, I first set the value that is easiest for me to maximize at the moment, and that will be decentralization. You can see this from these points and this arrow in that direction. The higher it is, the faster you will do it. Decentralization will increase automatically each month by 0.48 up to a level of 48 points. To grow further, you either need to increase this modifier, or later the only ways to increase it further are essentially parliamentary actions or random events. The second action is increasing local development. When your advisor has nothing to do, they should always perform this action. And ideally, they should do it in the capital. Secondly, these should be locations with the largest population. Restore prosperity whenever this action is available, because you do not want to have this value negative in a location. Do not use the control increase action because it provides rather short-lived bonuses. An exception may be locations with gold, silver or other valuable goods, but usually only at the beginning of the game. Also, if there is silver or gold within your territory, a law will appear for its extraction or sale. Personally, I am a fan of banning exports because this will increase revenue from minting your own currency. And these can even be significant. However, if I had many gold and silver mines in my territory, I would rather go for unrestricted export. In European countries, this mainly applies to Bohemia as well as Hungary. I would choose trade efficiency only for merchant republics, parliament and its actions. At the beginning, convene it outside the capital. This will speed up decentralization. First use it to make changes to the law that will positively affect the values we discussed. And then, if possible, always use this option to increase possible taxes by 25%. Just remember to set them to the maximum immediately. If you had automation, it would not work here. And you do not worry about these drops, you just enjoy the income. And after a year, once those taxes fall back down, look at how quickly the satisfaction of those estates will be restored. And this is possible precisely thanks to advanced decentralization. Also remember that parliamentary agendas can change values. Carry out only those that you need. Under no circumstances carry out those that will disrupt these values. Cities and towns and where to build them. Before building cities and towns, always try to reduce the prices of the raw materials required for this action. The maximum is 33%. In general, I would divide the construction of future cities and towns into two types. Tax cities and towns, that is those that are within the range of very high control and also have full access to the market. In the case of this type of city, I would not pay much attention to raw materials with the exception of two situations. First, when a given location has a bonus to a basic resource, such as Wieliczka, or if the location has gold or silver. Initially, one such location, which is your capital, is sufficient, and I would build another city only at the moment when I am approaching the building limit in the capital. And I would apply the same rule further. Whenever I am approaching the building limit, I would build another city. Then there are further cities and towns for population scaling. There is one such location per province. Initially a town, but ultimately I would upgrade it to the city level. Which location within a province I turn into a town is basically determined by the population limit. The higher it is, the better. However, more valuable resources such as gold, silver, iron or wool, I would skip and choose the second location in order. Or if some cheap resource is very rare in your area and you need it, I would also skip it. I start creating these type of cities when my income starts approaching 100 gold per month. However, this is not a hard rule because, for example, you may have a short period where building cities is cheaper, or you simply have nothing else to spend your ducats on. Buildings and RGOs, that is, where to build what. A more precise breakdown is essentially production buildings, that is those that receive certain resources in order to produce something. RGOs meaning the extraction of a basic resource, different for each location. And utility buildings, which provide certain bonuses but require goods for maintenance. Of this cost, you, as the state, pay only 20% of the value and 80% is supplied from the market. It is also good practice to reduce the price of wood and masonry as quickly as possible, because most buildings require these two resources for construction. Wood is best increased through RGO expansion. And if you do not have such an option, then through a building from the black category, that is, those with workers. Masonry has only one building that increases its production, however, it requires a large amount of stone to operate. I will start with what to build in locations meant for population scaling because here the matter is simple. The first type of building is granaries. This is the best building for increasing the food stock for the entire province. And the larger the food stock, the more population growth is increased. Granaries require masonry for maintenance, which increases demand on the market and you start earning from it. The next type of building is marketplaces. The main reason here is that you need burghers for them to operate, and burghers more effectively increase market demand for many goods, much more so than peasants. The second reason is the maintenance cost of these marketplaces. In practice, you will be increasing demand for these goods, which will positively affect your income. A bonus on top of this are all effects that increase trade capacity, trade advantage, or market access. Next, in these locations, you can build additional utility buildings. That is, those that provide effects such as temples, libraries, universities, or hospitals. For the obvious reason that, in addition to the bonuses they provide, they increase demand for the goods required for their maintenance, and also require a higher quality population to operate. To summarize, these locations, in addition to stimulating population growth, are meant to increase market demand. Supply, on the other hand, should be provided by all production buildings located in tax locations. The first of these is your capital. Here you will build all production buildings of every type. Everything that your market will need. If possible, also try to increase the production of wood and masonry here. Do not build production buildings in locations intended for population scaling. Personally, from time to time, I even go through them and demolish everything that is being produced there, because this will allow me to build more production buildings in those tax-focused locations, which means I will earn more. Initially, as you can see, I also do not specialize these locations, although I try to concentrate the production of a single type of good within one location, so that I always have at least some production bonus. However, once you reach a certain building limit, do not be afraid to move that production to another tax location. You do need to be very careful with production buildings though. Mindless spamming of this type of building can cause the product price to collapse, and instead of increasing your tax revenue, you will actually reduce it. For the goods you produce, try to achieve slight overproduction within your market so that the price begins to fall slightly. When this process starts, halt further construction. Ultimately, your goal is to eliminate imports of all products into your country. You should produce them locally. This rule does not apply to basic raw materials. These can be imported, although it is best to satisfy them through RGO construction, because that is also more profitable. This strategy stems from the fact that at average goods prices, you will earn more from taxes than from trade. Taxes are simply a higher percentage than what you can obtain from the crown. Unfortunately, this game also has a mechanic of very high trade costs, which means that the local price would have to fall very low for trade to take place, often below the profitability threshold of the building's operation. And that means that in reality, you are reducing your own taxes. For the first 200 years, it is truly much easier to earn money from taxes unless you are a merchant republic. In tax locations, it is also worth building all kinds of utility buildings, especially those that increase control or reduce the cost of distance from the capital, or that increase population growth thanks to large food stocks. In the capital, the only building you should not construct is marketplaces. You will always be short on burghers, so it is a waste to use them on this building. In the remaining tax locations, build enough marketplaces to ensure 100% market access. As for the black category, over time it may turn out to be profitable to build buildings such as those for extracting iron, charcoal, increasing the production of these resources, or tar. However, this depends heavily on the demand for these resources on your market. These types of buildings also often have terrain restrictions, so build them where you can. In the third era, a construction center will appear, and it is worth building it in every city and town. Bridges are also worth building. RGOs, that is, buildings that extract basic raw materials. They are best constructed using the building planner always in order from the most profitable to the least profitable, one at a time, so that the population has time to promote. From the very beginning of the campaign until practically its end, RGOs will be your primary building type for increasing income, so you build them whenever it is profitable. That is, down to zero. And certainly, when you do not know what to spend your money on, check whether it is worth spending it on RGOs at that moment. And the last category is green buildings, that is, peasant buildings. And basically from this list you should be able to see which ones are important. And this is what it looks like for countries with access to the sea. The advantage of this type of building is that once built, they operate immediately and immediately start contributing to taxes. Peasants, as long as they are not working in at least such a building, do not provide any taxes at all. By far, the most important building of this type are market villages. Each village provides a large number of higher social class workers, increases food stocks, which affects population growth and gives slight bonuses to trade as well as market access. In addition, each village has a large number of production methods that can be used already from the early stages of the campaign. Sure, burger buildings that produce these goods are more efficient, but at the beginning of the game, burgers are always scarce and have other goods they can produce. Next in order are farming villages, which have large food stocks and therefore effectively increase population growth. Their only downside is that over time they may require subsidies to operate. Fishing villages are the most powerful building for the first 100 years of the campaign. They increase port throughput on the coast, increase food stocks and also enhance trade capabilities. This is a very important building for countries such as England or Castile. As for forest villages, I would not build them at all. Settlements are situational, you build them when you can to speed up population growth, most likely after the Black Death. As for production methods related to your buildings, I usually automate them. In most countries this works very well. However, if your country has problems with certain resources, you will likely want to turn this option off and set everything manually, because you will often need to balance between several different production methods. Trade and markets. After the latest changes, I personally treat it as a bonus to my income. Therefore, I basically turn on automation and do not worry about it at all. As a monarchy, I would gain access to additional markets in essentially one of two ways. A military one, through conquest I capture one or two provinces that are heavily populated within a given market. Then I build many cities and towns there and develop them with marketplaces. This allows me to dominate that market in terms of trade power, as well as export and import capacity within that market. And this is a good tactic against all countries that are of a different faith or where your religions are hostile to each other. Usually, within the same religious group, it is better to act peacefully and establish those trade offices. This path, however, is most profitable for merchant republics. For the rest, it is only moderately effective. The transition period begins with the onset of the Age of Discovery, and more precisely with the invention of Tier 2 workshop technologies for the production of paper and books. Yes, this means that different countries will reach this point at different times anyway, and it should end no later than the Age of Reformation, when you will have already researched most Tier 2 production buildings. Values. You begin a slow process of shifting toward these two values. While free subjects will reduce your tax income from peasants, they will increase the speed of social promotion by 100%. This is because you want peasants to turn into burghers as quickly as possible. They will also increase maximum prosperity by 25, which will allow you to maximize population growth. In a capital economy, the focus is primarily on production efficiency. That is, your buildings produce relatively more using the same amount of raw materials. This is very easy to see in this example of my book production, where with 39 building levels I consume 39 paper, but in return I produce significantly more than 39 books over 65. Reforms and privileges. During the transition period, you set up those forms of government and privileges that strengthen the two values I mentioned earlier, or at least do not counteract them. Slowly and one by one, revoke the privileges that positively affect serfdom and the traditional economy. Yes, this is associated with high stability costs, so you can leave such privileges for stage 2. Instead, grant privileges that increase free subjects and the capital economy. Also reform laws that negatively affect these values. Cities and towns. You will begin partial specialization of cities. Notice that already now, at the second tier, I can build up to 40 levels of a single building, whereas at the first tier it is a maximum of 25. And cities unfortunately have a building limit. Start constructing additional towns, already abandoning the rule I mentioned earlier, that is, waiting until you run out of building slots. Place them in locations with the highest control, and improve market access by building marketplaces, in such quantities as to reach 100%, but not more. Then convert towns into cities, but remember that you need a minimum population of 30,000 in that location. It is best to support this with the option to encourage migration. However, this requires a privilege allowing the movement of lower social classes. Alternatively, a law, as some countries have this, you can speed up the entire migration process with this option by expelling population from a place where you do not need it, that is, where you have lower control. Just remember that migration always takes place within the market. Also create additional cities and towns, even if they would remain unused for now. because in stage 2 you will need a very large number of them. Because in practice, in a city you will have 3 to 4 types of production and over time even fewer. Trade. For it to start functioning at all, you need some bonuses to trade costs, for example through such a form of government. At this stage it is still not much better than before, but you are already starting to earn money from selling, for example, books. I also sometimes create trade routes that do not generate profit but ensure access to the raw materials I need. Colonization and exploration. In Africa, it is worth securing footholds that will allow you to extract raw materials there. And in stage 2, transport them to your main trade hub. Focus primarily on exploring the Americas and colonizing them first. Stage 2 begins at the moment when you have researched the entire main path that grants access to Tier 2 production buildings. At this stage, income from burghers and peasants should at least be on par, and trade income will become an increasingly important part of your budget. I will start with values. I recommend mercantilism in order to further reduce trade costs. In addition, it will also make it harder for cheap raw materials to flow out of your market. The only downside is that it will slightly negatively affect the price value of the goods you sell. You will also face a decision of whether to continue along the path of decentralization or shift toward centralization. If you are playing with a focus on colonies, I would go with decentralization. If you are playing a land-based state, then rather centralization. However, I would wait with changing these two specific values until the year 1600. At that point, a crisis will occur that significantly facilitates changing values, in one direction or the other. This crisis will also allow you to get rid of all unwanted privileges that may have remained after the transition period. As you build roads and expand ports, your control will increase. These will cause practically all locations in your main market to engage in production and operate under taxation. And all adjacent markets, or those from colonies, Africa and the rest of the world, will serve you as a base for acquiring cheap raw materials. It does not matter whether these will be your own locations, some vassals there, or those states remain independent. In these markets, you aim to achieve the greatest possible trade advantage as well as the highest throughput. Thanks to this, you will push out even the countries present there. And you do this in exactly the same way as I showed you during the transition stage. You see some populous region, build cities and construct a large number of marketplaces. Plus, you send ships to increase trade advantage. Ultimately, your main market will export literally to all of Europe and the rest of the world all finished and processed goods, as well as much rarer raw materials that you will begin importing from Africa or India. And yes, in stage 2, you will need far more marketplaces for all of this to work. So it is even worth leaving them for last in the capital, although this will involve enormous costs. When it comes to constructing further buildings, stage 2 is really simple in this regard. Now city specialization truly begins. Do not be afraid to demolish old, no longer needed buildings or those that are less profitable. I also often demolish buildings producing masonry or wood and move them to the countryside. The two most important statistics for trade to function, the first is production efficiency. In this tooltip you can clearly see where you can obtain this modifier. However, it is worth noting that the bonus per building level per era is smaller. This will allow you to earn money on goods even though their price will be relatively lower. The second very important statistic is everything that reduces trade maintenance costs. In this tooltip you can see that a strong reduction of this cost affects the final profitability of trade routes. And it is precisely the combination of these two mechanics that makes trade start to work and become one of your main sources of income. Of course, trade is a much more complex subject. If you want to master it, I recommend this guide.